Welcome, Gail, to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
I'm so glad we finally got you on the show because I've been reading since back with Sumage Solution, and it's like we got to get Gail on. We need to get Gail on.
I am delighted. I am a devoted listener, and so I'm quite honored to finally get to be here. It's great.
And you've got a book coming out. Well, you've just had a book come out, actually. The Fifth Gender just released.
Yes, The Fifth Gender. It's my crazy, ridiculous, silly, happy yet cozy murder mystery on a space station with an alien with 5 genders and tentacles and purple.
You don't often get cozy mystery space station together in one package.
It's great. It was totally one of those spontaneous, I had a strange thought / dream / idea to do this. And a bunch of us were joking on Twitter about the craziest mashups of genres we could come up with. And somebody was like, barbarian noir, and so on and so forth. And I was like, well, I want to do space station cozy mysteries. And then I started thinking about it. And then it happened. And then I was like, oh, okay, I'll write it. I was supposed to be writing something else, of course. But sometimes I succumb to the lure of the ooh shiny.
And it was a purple shiny, too. So how could you resist that?
I could not. And he's adorable, the alien character. And I have a background as an anthropologist. I have a couple of archaeology degrees. And so I just love the way if you're doing an alien character, you can comment on human social structures and culture and interactions, and so I might have had a little too much fun with that.
Well, I was actually going to get into that. I'll hold that.
I'm jumping ahead. Oh dear.
Because we should at least tell folks, because I want to talk a little bit more about the origin story on this, because you wrote about it so just I had this idea in the middle of the night, and then I tweeted it, and then it was a story, which I love. But then there's the fact that you went away to a retreat and worked on it and had to talk to other people about it while you were writing it.
Yes. So for those, I should preface this by saying that for those who don't know, I have 2 names I write under. So I write under Gail Carriger and I write under GL Carriger. And the GL stuff has a much higher heat level, so it's super sexy. And this book, The Fifth Gender, is a GL book. So warning for anybody who doesn't like Nookie, because one of the things I realized through the course of that particular writing retreat was that if you're writing about a species with 5 genders, human curiosity wants to follow them into the bedroom to see what it's like down there. And so I thought about trying to kind of clean it up a little bit, and it didn't work. So I was like, okay, we are going into that realm. So, and one of those was, I was supposed to go on this retreat and write something else entirely, and instead I just spent the entire week writing this book. And one of the funniest stories from that was me being like, oh, shoot, what does alien jizz taste like? because we all know, at least we do if we've been reading my San Andreas Shifter series, that wizard or mage jizz is fizzy and werewolf is spicy. And I was like, well, what do aliens taste like? And this meant that I literally had to go, and you're never on a retreat, you're never supposed to disturb the cooks in the kitchen. But I was like, if there was ever a question for cooks, this is it. And so there's a crazy author running into the kitchen in the middle of them making shepherd's pie and being like, you guys, what does alien jizz taste like? Debate. So we had a long debate about it, and we finally decided. And you'll have to read the book to find out.
Yeah, I wasn't going to ask you to spoil that, but I do have to know, what exactly did the cooks make of this question?
The cooks were quite game, actually. I think they were pretty charmed, because normally, they're doing their art form and we're doing our art form, and never the twain shall meet until meal times. So it's really rare for one of the authors to actually want the cooks' help on something. So I think they were kind of pleased to be asked.
Well, that's very cool, because some of them might have been like, I'm sorry, what?
Well, they know what I write. We've been going for a long time. It's been the same cooks for a while. So
this group knew you, so they weren't necessarily surprised by...
No. Well, it was a little out of the blue. I haven't been writing the super sexy stuff for very long. Normally my questions are what's the most ridiculously named, Victorian dessert you can think of kind of thing. But but yes, it was a little different from my usual questions. But
And tell us what this book is about, this cozy mystery on a space station.
well, the tagline is an alien race with no word for murder has a murderer aboard their spaceship. And essentially, the Galloi are the aliens in question, and there's these adorable sort of purple tentacled kind of, high elf, slightly looking alien creatures. And they are super isolationist, and the only thing that humans know about them is occasionally they will kick one of their genders. It's always one of the examples of the fourth or fifth genders, and they're kicked off and they're in exile, and those Galloi, which is the name of this alien race, go and live amongst humans. And humans actually adore them because they think they're like sweet and cute and adorable, and they're pure exiles, so they have no national allegiance, they have no planetary allegiance, and so they make really great attachés. They're really kind of comforting, and lots of different alien races like to be around them, so they often like become attachés to like ambassadors and stuff. So a lot of space stations consider it really lucky if they get one of these. And the main character Tristal, he's one of these aliens, and he has a mad crush on the human security chief slash detective that's on board the space station, named Dre, but he doesn't really get kind of like human flirtation and courting rituals. So the book sort of starts with Tristal trying to figure out what cats are and why you would want to keep them as a pet, because he's been asked by some human friends to cat sit. And then, of course, the cat escapes and hijinks ensue on the space station, because what happens when the cat gets into zero gravity? Nobody wants to find that out. Anyway, and then the Galloi are like super xenophobic, so they never reach out to humans. And then suddenly a Galloi ship approaches his space station, which is crazy in many, many ways, because they shouldn't be approaching a space station that has an exile aboard it, and they never talk to humans anyway. And they have this incredibly complicated non-pronounced language that kind of indicates status and has to do with all of these different genders. And so the humans are kind of panicking and freaking out. They don't want a war. They don't know what's going on. And the spaceship basically says, we have a murdered Galloi, and we don't know what to do. We don't have security. We don't have murder investigations. So we came to you, violent humans, to figure this out for us. And of course, Dre, the human love interest, is the detective. So he and Tristal have to team up because he needs Tristal's help to explain how the Galloi work. And so the two of them gonna figure out who done it. And that's basically it in a very large nutshell.
How did you go about creating the Galloi? I mean, 5 genders, no term for murder.
I know.
There's like so many things that kind of click into this. Is there like
wheels within coils? It's just so, like I said, I have an anthropology background. Archaeology is obviously the biology and skeletal structures and things is what I mostly studied via anthropology, but you get a lot of like gender studies and cultural representations of gender and all that sort of thing as part of an education when in the United States if you do an archaeology degree. And so it's always been super, super fascinating to me. I have a minor in classical mythology with a focus on gender. It's just something that has interested me, and it's really hard to tease out in the archaeological record. It's prone to misinterpretation by archaeologists and historians and anthropologists. So there's a sort of storied history with our own relationship from a scientific perspective with understanding gender. And so I just took a lot of that, both kind of my education and, how the world now is changing. I spend far too much time on Tumblr. So I have a lot of like non-binary and gender fluid and gender queer fans. And so I've just been kind of reaching out to friends and acquaintances. One of my best friends in the world is a bioethicist and a medical ethicist. And so she deals with like training doctors in how to talk to people appropriately about gender. And so I've had all this sort of stuff messing about, and I was like, well, a way for me to explore this and have this kind of conversation with myself and the world is through an alien lens. Um, and so I love thought experiments, and I was like, so what if we have a race with five different genders, and how would their language evolve? How would their culture evolve? How would they treat each other? Like all of these, archaeological things to think or anthropological things to think about. And then how would humans, even future humans, react when encountering that? And so that's kind of where the conception started. And then I just made them purple because I like purple.
Why not? I'm a big purple fan too. So, was there a lot of research kind of building
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, I actually have multiple blog posts that are gonna either I'm releasing them right now or I've just released them recently, speaking from the past into the future. Uh, but I have a bunch of blog posts about like a bunch of the research that I did and like some book recommendations and stuff like that, both from a fictional perspective and a non-fictional perspective and different blogs and stuff like that. But I like that. I like researching a lot. I try not to rabbit hole too much because the point is to write the actual book.
Right.
So mostly what I did is I did that intensive week where I sort of just vomited forth this whole book. And then I went back and like teased it apart and looked into different, I almost treated it a little bit as if it were a nonfiction piece, to go back and see, well, what sources do I need to look up? What different pronoun terms might be being used in hundreds of years, by humans, that sort of thing. And it's since both the humans involved, I try to be complex in my races, whether they're werewolves or aliens, in that and to not either dystopian or utopianize either race, either humans or aliens. So both races still have issues. Both are still dealing with how the cultures have evolved and all of that sort of thing. So I'm not setting the Galway up as like the perfect model of a possible future. They have a different evolution, a different model, and they're merely a vehicle for which we can examine perhaps some of our own biases and prejudices now. And that's getting very, very serious because mostly what I want my books to do is make you happy and cheerful and be excited and delighted. And if it makes you think a little, that's great. But really, I just want to make everybody happy, and hopefully Tristal will do that because he's delightful. I love him.
What kind of, I guess, beta reading did you do to see how your various fans handle the gender discussion?
Well, I have trans and gender queer and gender bending characters already, both in my main universe and in my traditionally published books and in all of my like my independent and my self-published works and in my novellas and stuff. Like not some of them main characters, some of them side characters. And so I know that they're open to it, and I also know that the one that, for lack of a better term, I have like a queer-centered, progressive kind of comfort food brand or business model or whatever, however you want to term it. And so I feel like most of my super fans are going to be excited because what they want from me is that comfort, is that sort of upbeat, fun, slightly fluffy, slightly thoughtful, but ultimately, everything's going to be all right. And I'm never going to depress you. There's never going to be like scenes of torture. It's never going to be angsty, all of those things. It's always going to be delicious, I guess.
I like that as a term for a book. That's just really fun.
Yeah. It's just going to be tasty yumminess. So they know that. And that's the part that they trust. And generally, I feel like they're pretty open-minded about how I'm going to go there and explore that. I don't think I would have done this book, 5 or 6 years ago because I wasn't sure. I had to kind of test the waters with the San Andreas books and some of the other stuff. But I think they're pretty open to it. I don't know. You never know. We'll see how everybody reacts. Um, yeah. So I mean, and I have beta readers, and some of them have read it. I was more careful with this book in making sure that like I had sensitivity, what I call delicacy readers. So people within kind of the gender nonconforming community, again, for lack of a better term. That was more important to me, really.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to offend, although, you know, everybody's opinion is their own and everyone is entitled to it. So I'm sure if you come to any book with the idea of being offended, you're probably going to be, unfortunately. So, but I did put essentially a naked purple dude on the cover as a kind of like, be aware, there's gonna be sex in this book. We're gonna go there. We're gonna go far out there.
It's cozy with sex, and it's funny, and it's sci-fi.
It's sci-fi, exactly.
It's got a little bit of everything in it.
Exactly.
Do you think you'll revisit this later as like as a continuing series, or?
I would love to. Actually, I have another murder mystery in line. I don't consider myself like a mystery writer at all, but I like immediately I have this, so I have this thing as a writer where I don't write a book until I've had what I call the epiphany, which is I need to actually see a scene with characters in dialogue, and it might not necessarily be the first scene or whatever, but until I see that, I have that crystal moment, I don't feel like I can write the book. So I have a lot of books that I'd like to write, but I've never had the epiphany with, so they're just sort of sitting there. And I've had an epiphany for a second book in this series with Dre investigating another murder, and Tristol's still there and everything. But I don't know how people will receive this one, so I don't know if I will write that one, but it's definitely there percolating already.
It's
so
a possibility.
It's a possibility, yeah. And the universe as a huge, on the whole, because it is a science fiction universe, actually does have another, of all things, young adult series that's set in it, that's kind of been on the back burner for a really long time, which kind of has nothing really to do except with this series, except that the same conceits in terms of faster than light travel and human and colonization and planetary evolution are the same, and there's like a couple of crossover alien races, but that's about it. But it is the same sort of basic far future.
Yeah. If you've got the universe, you might as well keep using it, so you don't have to just keep reinventing the wheel.
Precisely, yes. Yeah. That's my feeling.
What do you hope readers take away from this romp?
Ooh. Well, like usual, I just want them to be like, my favorite thing is somebody writes to me and says, you either humiliated me because I was laughing loudly on public transport, and I'm like, yes. You kept me up all night, like, yes. Or you just left me with a big smile. So that's really what I genuinely want, is a big smile on people's faces. But it would be nice if people who read it thought a bit more about gender and how we intimately link biological sex with gender, and that perhaps that's not necessarily that's not necessarily the ethical thing to do, that perhaps gender is in fact a social construct. It's just something or a cultural construct. It's something that anthropologists just accept. Like if you're an anthropologist, you just accept that as a fact. Like we have seen all of these different ancient and modern races or cultures with varying different interpretations of genders, and I don't think it would ever occur to an anthropologist to like not be like, yes, gender is cultural. But it seems that in the world today that isn't an accepted principle, and so I guess if anything, I want people to kind of get it, to maybe think a little bit about pronoun use and all that sort of stuff, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Now, as both Gail and GL, you run across a lot of genres. You've got your urban fantasy, you've got some paranormal, now you've got cozy mysteries in space. Comedy definitely cuts across all of them. Is there like a genre that's like you like urban
Uh,
fantasy most, or paranormal, or just how they all cross up, or
I would say I have wheelhouses more than anything else. So there's
okay.
a podcast called Reading Glasses that talks about, as readers, we tend to have wheelhouses. And if you read heavily in romance, you define those often as tropes.
Hmm.
You know, like I like the enemies to lover or whatever. But a wheelhouse kind of has other things. So, and I would say that there are definitely wheelhouses I gravitate to. So I always write the heroine's journey. I never write the hero's journey, regardless. Again, this is the gender thing, right? Regardless of the biological sex or stated gender of my main character, they're always heroine's journeys, because a heroine's journey, it doesn't matter who's undertaking it. Um, so I would say that is one of my things. I always do found family, and I realized recently I had this big revelation that one of the reasons I strongly gravitate to reading gay romance in particular is because found family is a
Hmm.
really popular trope within gay romance for obvious reasons. Because if you come to the queer community, it's usually partly found family that brings you there. Because real family rejected you, at least often did when I was younger.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, and I just love that um, as a trope, for lack of a better word. And so I have found family in my books all the time. I tend to have extremely strong female main characters, except when I'm writing gay romance, of course. Yeah, and lots of queer. I was thinking recently that a slogan I really embrace would be queer comfort, because I feel like that's kind of in all of my books, even the books that have heterosexual main couples. It's really hard. I at this juncture, I guess you could say that I trust my readers enough to relax and just write what moves me. I wouldn't have written this book if I didn't think at least some of them would enjoy it.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, what a privilege and kind of a blessing and a joy to get to do that. But it has been 10 years, so it did take a while.
And you mentioned that you're not known for mystery, certainly. So you've taken this turn now to at least explore it once. Are there
Yeah.
other things out there like going after and trying to write a mystery that are still things you want to do, things you're looking at towards the future?
Absolutely. There's always like I adore high fantasy. Obviously, I'm really into world building, and so like I have a young adult high fantasy. It's actually techno fantasy, kind of like the Pern books,
Hmm.
or Darkover, and so I'd like to do that. There's a bunch of stuff that I kind of am excited and interested in. I'm a pretty voracious and pretty wide reader, so that I think that makes you, generally speaking, a relatively wide writer. I think it's unlikely I would ever break the trust contract that I have with my reader base and write anything like dark. I certainly would never write anything gritty or gruesome. I don't like to read that, so I'd never write it. And I think I'm out of my dark phase now that I have left high school. So I don't do the really kind of darker, angsty stuff. I was thinking about contemporary recently, actually, and I don't think I could write contemporary. The moment I start to like think about writing something that's just a contemporary romance or like women's lit or even something, heaven forfend, like proper lit fic, it immediately just goes fantastical. I have to inject. And if I were to describe myself as anything, it is, science fiction and fantasy rooted. I like the world building a lot. And so I think it's unlikely that I'll ever write something that doesn't have at least that as part of the component.
Hmm. So, how did you go from studying archaeology and getting these degrees to now becoming full-time author, writing all these books? What was that path?
Oh my goodness. So I have two master's degrees, and I was working on my PhD. And I always thought I would be an academic. I genuinely love archaeology. I'm one of those incredibly lucky people who left one career that she adored for another career that she adored. So, tragedy of choice. But so And I was about 2 years, I was about to do my defense, and I was about 2 years out, which would have been my thesis years, finishing my PhD. And I always wrote. I just grew up on what essentially amounted to kind of like a hippie commune kind of thing, and surrounded by artists. And the only thing I had learned really from that is that artists never make any money, and so being an author was really a bad idea. So I was like, okay, I'll be an academic because woo, you're profitable. At least it's quasi reliable, right? Um, but I always wrote. I just had that need. It's kind of like breathing or something. And I figure if I write, I might as well submit. And so I was submitting and writing and submitting. And then I wrote Soulless as kind of a challenge to myself. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I have a propensity for rewriting things over and over and over a million times and never actually finishing anything. And so Soulless was like, you will take 6 months. You will write this weird book. This was during the paranormal romance and urban fantasy bubble of the late 90s, early 2000s. And I was like, what I really want I want a bunch of things, right? I want women to write funny stuff in commercial genre, and that's pretty rare. Most of the writers I knew who wrote funny stuff were like Terry Pratchett, Christopher Moore, Jasper Fforde, like a bunch of dudes. And I was like, where are my ladies writing funny? Where's my urban fantasy set in a historical time period? I wanted all of these things, and nobody was writing it. And finally, I was like, well, that means I have to.
Take the challenge.
Take the challenge, and I really did write it as a challenge. And Soulless is a mashup. It tends to be what I write, obviously. I mean, I'm here talking about a space cozy mystery romance, so I obviously like mashing up things. And so Soulless is steampunk, urban fantasy, comedy of manners, romance, right? It's a bunch of these different things. And I was like, no one will buy this, because I had been in and out of the publishing industry and submitting short stories. And I was like, it doesn't have a place in the market. There's no shelf it sits on. Like, no one's going to buy this, but I wrote it, so I might as well send it out. And I had one of those slush pile telephone calls from New York where like within a month, somebody wanted to buy my silly little bit of fluff. And I was like, no, you're joking. Yeah, and Soulless was a slow burn. It hit the market, and it was really word of mouth. The librarians and the independent bookstores were like behind me 110%. They just loved this crazy little book, and I think it was mostly the funny, but super strong heroine, and like gruff, overly emotional werewolves, and queer characters from the get-go, and it just appealed to a kind of segment of society. And then so I was about to do my defense when Changeless, my second book, hit the New York Times, and that kind of seed changed everything. It changed marketing. It changed how much money New York was willing to offer me, and my partner at the time was like, I make enough money to support us. Why don't you take a break from academia and see if this writing thing works? And I did, and I haven't been back.
Well done.
Yeah.
10 years on.
I mean, a lot of it's serendipity, and a lot of it is good friends. And then a lot of it was also like, I'm an archaeologist. Archaeologists are like the organizers of anthropology departments. We're logistics. We get large groups of people into foreign lands and then make them shovel dirt around. We feed them and house them, blah blah blah. We're big on spreadsheets and organizing. So I already had that kind of part of my personality that I think not a lot of authors have. And so when I was successful, I was ready to be like, okay, let's figure out how many books I can write in a year. Let's figure out, like, I like trad, but maybe this independent publishing thing is interesting. Let me go research that and experiment with that. Let's try this thing. And I've always been like that, even with my traditional publishers. Like, they would be like, you sell really good in ebooks. And I was like, that's because I have romance readers. And they were like, how do you feel about maybe doing this strange BookBub thing? And I was like, I think that's a great idea. Why don't we do that? It's like, I am game. So, I think that has also helped, is I've always been willing to take a risk, partly because I have a safety net. It's like, I can always go back to being an archaeologist. That's fun too.
What's your overall process? I mean, it sounded like, if I understood from our fifth gender discussion, it almost sounded like you did the first draft of that book at the retreat.
Yeah. I work really well, it turns out, in a competitive environment. I didn't realize. But if I really am one of those writers who I'm social in terms of I like to sit across from somebody like at a cafe and just type. And just the act of having another writer or a bunch of writers around me also typing is really helpful to me. And part of it is kind of looking at me like, how many words have you done? Oh, shoot. And then just typing some more, But yeah, so I do this one retreat every year, and I know I can do 40,000 words at that retreat, which is either one novella or most of one of the GL books. So I usually sort of get prepared ahead of time, whether that preparation is writing the first 10,000 or just I'm an outliner, so I'll get all the outline ready, I'll get all the world building ready. And once I hit the ground there, I can just churn out a bunch of words, and that's great. I try to do a couple of other kind of long weekend baby retreats. I'd love to find other week-long retreats, but the style that I like is pretty rare. And the style that I like is just a bunch of writers writing and no workshops or critiques or anything. Mm-hmm. So I do that, and then most of the rest of the time, I am not somebody who can handle multiple projects. I learned that about myself the hard way. So I have to be working on one book, and then close that book out, and then move to another one. And so if it's an independent project, what I'll often do, so if it's something that I'm going to be self-publishing, I'll often write the whole thing on a retreat or over the course of a couple of months, and then just put it to bed. And then focus on incoming copy edits or a proof pass or writing a completely different project and let it sleep if I can. I find that marination really helps. And then I'll go back and do a reread. And I'm a multiple editor. I think a lot of comic writers have to be, because I do passes for like different kinds of comedies. So I'll do like a wordplay pass, and then I'll do sort of a slapstick pass, and then I'll do like rule of three descriptive passes to try and get as much different kinds of humor back into a book as possible. And then I have an alpha reader or two, and they read before it goes either into my New York editor or off to my beta readers. And then I actually hire and use a developmental editor for my independent stuff as well, partly because that tends to lean more romantic. And when I first started writing it, I didn't really think of myself as a romance author, so I wanted to make sure that I was getting kind of the beats right for romance. So I have an editor who specializes actually in gay romance, who reads all of my romances and gives me feedback. And then it goes to beta readers for the Parasolverse in particular, because there are 25 books in that universe, and there's lots of crossover characters. So most of my beta readers are actually just super fans who are obsessed with the universe and have written me either critical letters about mistakes that I made in terms of getting character names wrong or eye colors or something. And usually I'll be like, would you be interested in being a beta reader?
Right. Put those people to work.
Exactly. I was like, if you're going to do this anyway, how would you like to get everything ahead of time and lots of extra? I give them lots of extra perks as well, special editions and stuff. So it's quite a process at this point, but my beta readers are killer. I've got just a team of 4 now, and they're really fast and great. I love them. And then I have a couple of awesome copy editors that I use, and then a proof. The Parasolverse gets a woman named Shelley Adina, who's a fantastic steampunk author in her own right, and a Regency, and who's really, really good on the Victorian era. So it gets a world a historical proofing, basically. And then and then I have a formatter. I'm a big fan of finding people who are really good at what they do and hiring them to do it for me. I could change my own oil, I'm sure, but I'd really rather find a good mechanic. You know, that's how I feel about kind of the book world as well. So I have a fantastic cover art designer I love working with, and I just got to put my team in place and then hope that no one gets sick.
Right. That's the key. Nobody can get sick. Right. Not right now.
Get sick. Leave me. Very forlorn when that happens.
So you mentioned that you read a pretty broad swath of stuff. What are you reading right now that you're loving?
So I just did a reread on Amy Lane's Fool and His Nanny. which because it got nominated for the Rita Award,
Hmm.
and it was one of the few that did that was queer. So I had read it before, so I just did a reread on that, and I still love it. It's very cute, and I love Amy. Amy's one of the nicest human beings in the world. So that was really fun to redo, and I'm a huge fan of Mary Calme. I don't know how to say her last name,
You actually
but
got it right.
did I? Oh,
You
good.
did.
Yes, I will read pretty much. She's an auto buy for me. I just find I know she's there are tropes in place that but I just find her stuff really she's a comfort read for me. And as somebody who writes what I hope is comforting for others, like I'm always hunting for authors that give me that same sensation. One of my like constant of all things comfort reread rotation is Alexis Hall's For Real, which is a fantastic BDSM, but it's just like I don't know what the writing is so good. And I will reread R. Cooper, Until the Cows Come Home, the Beings in Love series, which I really, really adore. So, which is a urban fantasy, basically.
So you're a podcaster also, about
I
on top
am.
of all this other stuff.
I know. That is
And
like my completely not connected to anything side project.
well, I'm looking, I'm reading the website, getting to know kind of what I want to ask about. I'm like, a podcast. Wow, okay. And it's about travel hacks called the 20-minute delay. How did this come about?
So one of the things that happened to me in the course of this career is I went from being an archaeologist. I traveled a lot as an archaeologist to being an author, where it turns out I travel like 5 times as much. When I was book touring regularly, I was doing 2 book tours a year at least, and that was not counting all of the conventions and stuff I was doing. And a book tour is like 10 cities in 10 days. I mean, it's crazy traveling. So I turned into a frequent traveler, and I'm an organizer, and I like to hack things and figure out the most efficient way to do everything possible. And I realized I was doing that with travel. And there are 2 things that I can talk well, there are 3 things that I could talk about, books that I love, like literally until the cows come home, food that I love to eat, and travel hacks. And I was like, and then I met my friend Piper, and Piper has a day job that has her traveling 80% of the time, and she has, if possible, more travel hacks than I do. And the 2 of us are like so I was basically like, Piper, let's do a podcast, and it'll just be like 20 to 30 minutes, and we will just get on and we will chat about a place that we've been recently, and some like delicate matter of etiquette when traveling, like whether you recline your seat or not and how you deal with that. Or recently we did a really good one actually on rental cars. I don't rent a car that often, but Piper does all the time, and she had some awesome tips for like how to get the best rental car, and what apps to use and all that sort of stuff. And then we do a little gadget where we're just like, we test a gadget like a new neck pillow or something, and then we talk about what is our little gadget thing. And sometimes it's just like, I like the snacky bags. Like, you should always have at least 2 plastic snacky bags with you because they just always come in useful. So sometimes it's a gadget like that. But we have a really, really good time. And I'm a voracious podcast listener. Like when we started, I'm a fan of this show. So I figure it generally speaking, you eventually become a podcaster if you're a big fan of listening to them.
That's probably true. That's probably true. And I think for any of our listeners who are, thinking about, their trips to GRL come October,
Yes.
start listening to the 20-minute delay now to get all your travel
Yes.
situation put
Especially
together.
Because Piper and I are both authors. Like we try to couch our tips as much as possible in terms of anybody can use it, but we are both women. We are women who travel alone, and we are both authors. So we will tackle things like how to travel with a bunch of books, like how to fly with 50 books or what have you. And we also talk about like safety when you're staying in a hotel by yourself and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So what's coming up for you next this year with the writings? We've got the 5th gender out. What's coming next?
Next, I have the final book in my Custard Protocol series coming out, which is Reticence. And that's book 4 of the Custard Protocol. That comes out at the beginning of August. And that's actually rounding out the series is in the Parasolverse for a little while, my steampunk universe. I'm not ruling out doing another series in that universe, but I think I'm going to take a little break. And I'm on proposal for a new young adult series. So who knows? It's traditional, so could take forever, could suddenly happen. You never know. And then in October, I have a special collector's edition coming out from Subterranean Press called Fan Service, which is for my super fans, which has my 2 Supernatural Society novellas bundled together with a exclusive short story. That's a hardcover super fancy edition that there's only going to be 526 of those printed, and so that's my October release. It's so pretty. They give me very pretty covers. Subterranean.
That's cool. And what's the best way for folks to keep up with you online so they can keep track of all this?
Well, in addition to everything else, so in case anybody's in any doubt, I kind of have no life. If this is like what I listen to podcasts, I read, and I play online, and occasionally I write, because that's my job. But so I am on all the things online. I genuinely like social media. I know it's crazy, but you can pretty much find me on any platform that you like. If you Google Gail Carriger and then the name of the platform, I will probably pop up. And I try to use the platform in the way that it's best suited. So, there are pretty pictures on Instagram, and there are lots of pinned gorgeous dresses on Pinterest, historical dresses and crazy aliens. And then I also have a newsletter. The newsletter is definitely for super fans. So it's very chatty, and it's full of like sneak peeks as to what I'm actually writing and not talking about online yet. And I do like freebies and giveaways and stuff there.
We're going to link to all that good stuff in the show notes, of course, so people can find it easily. Gail, thanks so much for hanging out. It's been so much fun.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure. I can't say how delighted I am to be on, and I can't wait to listen to this from the other side.